Welcome to Boiling Point, the podcast to motivate ever-evolving entrepreneurs and forward-thinking movement pioneers. Our hosts, filmmaker Greg Hemmings and executive coach Dave Vale, are turning up the heat in the world's business communities. Our interviews with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and movement makers are raising the temperature of inspiration. Live from the hottest studio in this quadrant of the universe, here are Dave and Greg.
As our guest walks out in the virtual universe, Dave, we are back with the Boiling Point here, and we're live on Zoom. We're actually not live, but we are speaking live. All three of us are live, and Kelly, you've become a kind of a mainstay in the Boiling Point universe. This is something like the 28th time we've had you on now, I think.
Well, what I feel is that when you fellas aren't able to track down anyone else, then I get an email from Dave, which is great. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, it's that we've had a lot of really popular guests. No one to date has had a bobblehead. So That's something we thought we should celebrate, and maybe you can share because you had the bobblehead on the screen earlier.
Sure.
People want to see this.
There he is, right there. See the likeness?
Looks just like that.
You shave differently now, and your neck. You got a little bigger neck though. Stuff. What's really, and Kelly's a lawyer. For those people that don't know, and he's actually a bit of a Renaissance man, Greg. I was thinking about this, how we could introduce him for the maybe one or two guests or listeners that haven't actually heard his podcast yet. But he's like an author. He plays in a big band. He's a hockey coach. He's a professor at UNB. He's he goes out and trains and facilitates, helps people learn about respectful workplaces. He comes on podcasts. I mean, what do you play? You play a trombone, I believe.
That's right. It's the voice of God.
The voice of God.
That's what they call it. Yeah.
And he's an all-around good guy and a good friend to us. And he also has a really interesting profession in the current times. But before we get to that, because we want to talk about that, he brought up the fact that he was eating steak. Oh, they're nice background. I like that. For people that can't see, he's got a picture of himself a few years back with him. Greg, how do you do that? How do you change your background? I don't even know. I got to figure that out.
That's right.
I got it. So Greg, you don't know this, but I spent the night in hospital.
What?
Yes. It was.
You have another baby?
No, it was, and as you know, these times you don't want to be in the hospital if you don't have to be, and it's Sunday night. I'm having a glass of wine and eating a steak, and it got caught in my esophagus. Oh, the All Blacks, Kelly.
This sounds like the beginning of a joke. I don't know if I believe you right now.
Well, okay, let me tell you I'll tell you quickly because I don't want to belabor it but basically, I couldn't dislodge it from my esophagus. 3.5 hours in, finally, Mary Ellen says, you got to go to the hospital. So I go to emergency. They do all this stuff to try to dislodge it. You drink Coke, you do. And this is actually a relative, fairly common thing. I had no knowledge about this. Anyways, they couldn't do it in Emerge. So I had to stay in Emerge. There was no one there. But I mean, you're freaked out during COVID to be in the hospital. And then I had to see a gastrointestinal doctor who went down and pushed it through into my stomach.
What? So, what do they use to push it down?
I don't know. I tell you,
the vasectomy, Dave.
Was
it worse than the vasectomy? Just tell me that.
Oh, geez. I don't know. It was, well, you know what was worse or was better about this? Maybe I'll put it that way, was the fact that I was out. Whatever they gave me some miracle drug that I don't even want to know. And I never want to see it again because everything disappeared. Everything was happy. And when I came to, I was back in my room and I could read it. So it's been sore. So I haven't had much. I think so. When Kelly says he has haven't gotten near.
Dave, you've gone frozen, buddy. Welcome to the world of Zoom.
That's right.
Tofu.
Okay, Dave, we lost you. You turned into a robot. But it's really cool because Kelly and I were able to make assumptions about what you're actually saying. So
Did you say, I think they used a knitting needle to push it down? Is that what you said?
that's what I heard.
He's frozen again.
Anyhow, as Dave gets unfrozen, Kelly,
Yes.
we just had you on the Boiling Point with Dr.
Something
Dave
like that. Yeah.
just recently as well. So it's really cool to have you on. And after Dave unfreezes, I'm sure he's going to jump back into this. But you have a specific niche in the legal world, and really focus at workplace safety and whatnot. How is this crisis impacting your clients, if you will?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And of course, Greg, so many employers and so many employees are being negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's obviously such a massive impact in the whole society, and it's causing so many people distress on such a huge number of levels. And so for employers, what's happening is that in many instances, employers are stuck in this terrifying position of having to close their businesses as a consequence of a declaration of state of emergency by a province, whether it's New Brunswick or any other province in Canada. And it goes without saying, all of a sudden your revenue is trickling in or not trickling in at all. And for those employers, they have still this staff of people that have to be paid, but people that the employers care about too. So for employers, I think it's been a very stressful time. We can understand why it's stressful for so many employees, but it might be the case that we forget on occasion how stressful it is for the employers, right?
Well, I'm like, we're all three of us have teams that we're responsible for, so 100%. Like when the first week went down, when we realized that this was all real, I was really nervous. I remember talking to Dave about it. I was like, am I gonna have to lay people off? What's going on here? But it's really, it has been for us Canadians, a real blessing to be able to have so many supports for business. I know it's clunky and it's evolving, but the stress on the top, on a leader, if a leader's stressed, that so easily can trickle down and in negative ways to the bottom. But the fact that we've been able to, speaking for my company specifically, been able to have some of our salaries, some help on that from the federal government. It's not going to last forever, of course, but that relieved a lot of the stress from my shoulders. Right. And that lightness trickled down into the team. And the team is they're just so on it right now. And it's really kind of interesting, but I can see how it goes the other way as well. And that's probably what you're getting at too, is, not everybody has the luxury of support.
Sure. And there are complications as well, because for some businesses, they have to stay open. They can't close, and they can't have their employees working from home. Take, for example, services that involve retail grocery, or manufacturing of food products, for example, automobile repair shops. These are all places that have to stay open, really, if the society is going to have any semblance of continuing. And yet, those employers are facing the myriad of problems that you would expect, like employees who say, gee, I know we're open, but I'm terrified to come to work because I have a medical condition. Or a very common issue is, I, as the employee, I don't have a medical condition, but my spouse has an immune system compromise, and so I'm terrified to come to work. And then that puts the employer and the employee in a very difficult spot.
Am I back, you guys? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Who knows what was being used on the internet? I'm sure there's a game of some sort. No, so on that topic, Kelly, I had texted you something from a client that we have. He's, and there's an interesting kind of wrinkle on this that I wanted to get your perspective on, but just, saying like, a landscaper, can I send two people in the same truck? Like, what are the rules? And for the life of him, he couldn't seem to figure it out, for reading everything on government sites. And it was just like, what do I do here? So that's the first thing. And I'm wondering what's your, what would you advise people, or where would you refer them? That was the first question. Then I got a follow up to that.
Sure. Well, on that question, I think what employers have to do is exactly what all of us have been doing, and that is refer to the directives of the medical health people in the province that you're operating in. So each province has issued directives in terms of what's a requirement. And on social distancing, yes, that's right. Many employers are having to send employees to work sites in one vehicle, whereas, in single vehicles, whereas, 2 months ago, 4 or 5 employees might have gone to the site in the same vehicle. And so that's one requirement, but obviously there are such strong requirements on the hygiene aspects of maintaining your workplace now. So all of those directives that we see coming from the governments of each province and the federal government, those have to be followed by every employer, and it's not easy.
Yeah, and it seems like it's, in some cases it might be a little bit vague because people, things are happening so quickly, it's hard to track. And he was saying, I'm having trouble, and he was asking other businesses what they were doing that were in similar type situations and trying to cobble together a solution and wanting to comply, right? Like really wants to comply. But another piece to it, and I was curious about this, is, he said, well, maybe let's say you're allowed to, for whatever reason, put people in the same truck and you put a vapor barrier between the two people. And so they keep, they have physical distance, I guess, technically. And he brought up a really good point, and he said, but like, what are people going to, what if someone sees us driving down with our logo on the side of our truck, 2 people in the same vehicle, and he was kind of, I think, appropriately concerned about, the shaming or the Facebook or the blowback that could happen. So there's this other thing that people are thinking about, which is, what's the perception? Do people think we're putting our workers at risk, even if the workers themselves feel comfortable with the situation and they've taken all these precautions. So it just seems like there's this whole kind of social justice piece coming to play and I'm just wondering, have you been hearing that? Have people been asking you and talking to you about that? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, sure, because as we've seen here in our region, there have been a number of cases of severe reaction to perceptions of non-compliance with government directives. The physical assault that occurred at a local post office is one example, but in Newfoundland, we know that there was, a series of death threats made over what was perceived as non-compliance with the provincial directives there, and that's a circumstance that has been repeating itself across the country.
And so, and is there, I guess part of what I'm thinking is that people should be aware before you make any comments that could come back on you. In other words, there's probably ways you can handle this much more effectively than getting on Facebook.
Right, because first, without knowing the facts of any particular circumstance, making comments or derogatory comments, particularly about another person's conduct, can easily be defamatory. We don't know frequently what it is that we're saying on social media. We think we know, but we're commenting quite often in a bit of an information bubble, aren't we? So I think your point's a really good one, Dave. I think that people have to be extraordinarily cautious in terms of these extreme comments about whether or not someone is complying with the law or directives concerning COVID-19 that have been issued by a government.
Yeah.
What are you hearing, Greg? What is your sense? I mean,
well, yeah, I just think it's interesting that, Kelly making a point about defamation. Like, I don't even bother scouring through Facebook and whatnot, because it just, you see that stuff all the time. But I did hear of a case recently where a company was, like you said, allegedly was blamed for an alleged breach of compliance, and they were successful in suing for damages.
Right.
So I think the consumers, all of us, we should all be very careful and aware. One little post on Facebook about a person or a company could land you in some trouble, and that's not about freedom of speech discussions. It's about, right now, everybody's holding on as a thread to keep their businesses alive and their families, and we need to know that there's three sides to every single story, and
Right.
we're going to find a little bit of grace, I think, in how we judge others, and living by an example is the only response I have. Is, I'm staying home. My all my employees are working from home, so like, we're setting an example, and we're complying, as so that's it. But I know it's not easy for everybody. I just saw the craziest thing in the US, and I almost want to show it to you guys, but I might get sued for defamation from what I say of it. But in Ohio, people are protesting in the streets, like thousands of people stuck together protesting to get the economy back going. Then there's this tweet that was going around, and it was right out of Dawn of the Dead. Like, the picture, it was a zombie apocalypse picture, but it was real, of people that just weren't following the rules at all, and they were like, screw this, we want to get back to work. But that tells me that there's a severe lack of education, and that's not necessarily people's fault, that there's information not being relayed to them. But how important is it that we have free flow of communication from our businesses, from the top down,
Right.
but also from our political leadership? Unfortunately for our friends in the US, it feels like nobody trusts any source of information. So those people in the streets protesting, they've got a point. They want to get back to work. They didn't get the memo that being that close together with thousands of people is not going to help.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know how that relates to what you're doing, Kelly.
But actually, I think there's and Kelly and I talked about this one day a few weeks ago. And I was because I was just curious what his thoughts were. But I think you can find yourself on the wrong side of information sometimes. So as an example, whatever it was 5 weeks ago, school was on. There was a message came out from school about, yes, school's still on. And then by that evening, school had been canceled, right? So something happened in those 6 hours. And then there was messaging around, not gatherings of more than 150 people. And so you're trying to interpret this. And then it's, Elise had her 3rd birthday, and we thought, well, should we do it? Should we not do it as small? Had we given it 3 more days, we absolutely wouldn't have done it. But at the time, we said, listen, if you need to social isolate, please do. Don't come. All this kind of stuff. But someone could have looked at that event, and this is way back in March, and basically there's a little part of me that was thinking, geez, like, what, I don't know what to do here. So there's going to be a lot of judgment for people that just don't know what the right thing to do is. And I'm a little bit concerned about that, and I was asking you about that, Kelly, and you had a perspective.
Yeah, no, I think first, to Greg's point earlier, it's great that here in Canada there has been relatively strong, consistent information provided on some fundamental points. One of which is the right that workers have to refuse unsafe work. I think that's a communication that we should all take some comfort in. And it goes back to your comment earlier, Dave, about a landscaping business, because before any of the rest of us jump to conclusions as to whether or not that business is complying with directives issued by the government, we should recognize that the employees of that business have been exposed to this stream of communication that reinforces their right to refuse unsafe work. And so we can take comfort in that, knowing that those are people who likely have received very clear indications of what their rights are as employees. And I think, as you bring up with respect to the evolving information that we've been receiving, not just as Canadians, but as really a world audience. Think about the fact that several weeks ago, medical advisors were telling us that face masks were not really necessary or prudent, and there were reasons for that. But today, we see the opposite. We see medical advisors telling us that really you should wear a face mask. And that's a curiosity in itself, isn't it?
But to that though, all of us, including the top leaders, are in a world where they've never had experience in before. So things are changing. So sure, a message might be one thing for 1 week, but then new information and data comes in, say, no, totally the wrong path. We got to do this. So I used the word grace earlier. We do need a little bit of grace for the leadership. I saw, we're starting to see some nasty rhetoric between some politicians in our country towards our top chief medical officer. But things are happening. And then Trump threatening to pull out of the WHO funding. People are starting to throw blame when there's not enough information for anybody to make exact decisions. Leaders have to have the support of people to make decisions, even if sometimes they're wrong, as long as they continue to iterate and respond. I don't know. That's just a personal peeve of mine that everybody's casting blame and we should have known better. We should have had this prepared. Well, certainly, we've never been through this before.
It feels like hindsight's 2020, right? And
right.
I couldn't agree more. I heard a guy talking. He's an epidemiologist, and he was just saying, this isn't a time to be throwing stones. We can do a postmortem and figure out what went wrong, but right now we need to work together. Because I would think, and I'd be curious your opinion, Kelly. I say probably 95 or 98% of people want to do the right thing and are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's the sense that I have anecdotally as well. I think people are trying to do the right thing, but it's not always easy because we've spent a lifetime behaving in a certain way, and then to try to correct or to change those behaviors on a dime as a consequence of this pandemic isn't always easy. And an example is I had to go to the grocery store yesterday, and I really hadn't been in the grocery store since this started in earnest. And so trying to navigate the grocery store in ways that were completely contrary to my habits was a bit difficult because every aisle that I wanted to go down, it turned out to have an arrow pointing in the opposite direction. And so, and then of course, whenever I encountered somebody, I wasn't really sure how to get past them or whether to get past them. And so, I think for all of us, a bit of understanding is required, isn't it?
100%. So just as we wrap here, Kelly, how do people, I guess we need to know, people need to know how to get a hold of you and to learn more about some of the work you do. And if you could just quickly help us understand what changes are happening in the legal profession, and I'd be I'd be curious about how maybe you're delivering work differently now. And I know it's a big question, but what are you noticing? How are lawyers responding?
Sure. Well, I think lawyers are like so many other occupations, doing work from their homes. Right now in New Brunswick, the court system is effectively closed. It's not officially closed, and there are, cases proceeding in certain circumstances. But for the most part, cases that were scheduled to be heard in courts around the province, even today, have been adjourned indefinitely and will be rescheduled at some later date. In the arbitration world, the labor arbitration world, there is some effort being made to conduct hearings by Zoom. And I can tell you that as a bit of an experiment, at the University of New Brunswick Law School, we conducted the third year trial practice mock trial, which is a trial that involves 9 students participating as lawyers and 6 witnesses and about a dozen pieces of physical evidence with a judge. We conducted all of that on a platform like Zoom. And it was an interesting exercise, but what it demonstrated is that probably that can be an approach used in the future, and likely will have to be an approach used in the future.
And and actually it's funny because it segues in. We're going to talk, and you see Sean Ryan pop in the screen, and ironically, Greg, I know Sean from Kelly, and Sean's our next interview, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about the consulting world and how things are evolving to deliver services. Before I let you go, how do people reach you, Kelly?
Well, I'm hoping that they'll be able to reach me most times on the boiling point.
It seems to be a trend I see, and it makes me happy every morning. I wake up thinking maybe today I get to have Kelly on the board.
I'm sure. Okay, so if I'm not in Greg Hemmings' living room, I'm at Lawson Creamer in St. John on Prince William Street,
which
not
is
far from
next door to me, to Hemmings' house.
That's right.
We share the same men's washroom, you and I.
2 highly artistic offices sharing the same men's washroom. Yes, we won't go further on that, Greg. Right now.
LawsonCreamer.com.
That's it.
And right from the site, can you buy the bobbleheads?
Well, yes, you can if they're in stock. I can't guarantee it. You may want to ask Sean Ryan about his bobblehead, which could look similar to mine, actually.
Yes, I was going to say, we got a couple of really handsome bald guys here today. One last thing, Kelly. I've been listening to you and Mel's podcast. Why don't you give a little plug for that how people can listen? Because it's all about getting onto your newsletter, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. The legal coaching podcast that is done by Lawson and Creamer is one that covers a variety of stories in respect of the law practice. And our most recent episode has to do with common questions that are being asked by employers in the COVID era. We did a short one, though, too, with a couple of third-year law students because we were thinking there were probably a lot of university and high school students sitting at home and with time on their hands. And we thought, maybe a good service would be to give them insight into how they can find their way into a law school, right?
Cool.
Awesome.
That's awesome, man. So that's great. So people should take a listen. I enjoy hearing your voices there as well. I hear your voices everywhere, Kelly. Yeah, good. Great to see you.
Hey, listen, thank you, guys. I'll duck out now and say hi to Sean for me.
Oh, you can do that right. He's right beside you in the box, right beside you.
Oh, I don't see him.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. You have to go into gallery view.
Sean.
Our poor listening audience has no idea what we're talking about, but that's all
No,
good.
they don't.
All right, Kelly. We'll see you later, man.
See you later, guys.
Yeah.
Buddy, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Boiling Point. Remember to rate and subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Boiling Point Pod. To see more from Dave Vale, check out leadershipunleashed.ca or visioncoachinginc.com, and on Twitter at Dave_Vale. And to catch up with Greg, visit hemmingshouse.com and at Greg Hemmings on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and remember, keep that pot boiling.